Hi, Govanen. Welcome to the Tolkien Lore Channel. I'm the Tolkien Geek, and not too long ago I was listening to Corey Olsen's, or the Tolkien Professor's, the Exploring Lord of the Rings series, and something he mentioned in connection with the trip through Moria made me rethink something about Aragorn a little bit, and specifically Aragorn's character flaws. Previously, my only real thought on his character flaws was that he might be a little too prideful, let's say, because of his little experiment at Mediceld with testing how close he can get to a fight over giving up on Duril. But it turns out there might actually be a second flaw in Aragorn's character set. And the specific flaw is not exactly codependence, but something similar to codependence, something very like over reliance, let's say, on Gandalf in particular. And the reason this kind of came to mind is because of some comments that he was making in the Exploring the Lord of the Rings about how Aragorn had, of course, suggested going over the mountains, whereas Gandalf said they should go through Moria and go under the mountains. And in the discussion, it kind of all connected in my mind that the whole enterprise of getting across the mountains one way or the other, all the choices seem kind of bad, and it turns out that, yes, actually, Aragorn's idea was terrible because they almost all died, and then Gandalf's idea proved to be not a whole lot better because Gandalf seemingly dies. And as a result, you could see why Aragorn would suffer something like a PTSD moment after that because of the severe shock of, man, everything we do is wrong, everything I do is wrong, and the one guy who turned out to be kind of right is now gone. So all of this kind of combined led me to think of other things in the story that indicate that Aragorn has a bit of a dependent attitude towards Gandalf in a way, and there's plenty there. So I want to explore that a little bit. And if you're wondering what in the world I'm wearing, actually, this is something I got for a trip to a Renaissance fair not too long ago. And so I figured it kind of fit as something to wear for these videos. Which Renaissance fair it was, I don't exactly remember. It had something to do with herbs, parsley, rosemary, I don't know. Anyway, moving on from that, if you get it, you get it. But anyway, so looking at Aragorn and Gandalf's relationship, there's actually a lot going on there, and this is one of those things where you have to pick up on the subtle clues because Tolkien never gives us the inner thinking of Aragorn. We don't get that because the story is basically told from the Hobbit's perspective. Merry, Pippin, Frodo, and Sam are the only ones that we really get much in terms of their inner workings. We get very little time with anybody outside the view of the hobbits, and we have to assume that a lot of that is just stuff that was reported to them later, because Frodo and Bilbo and Sam are really the authors of the Red Book. That being said, what we do get are some hints about how Aragorn relates to Gandalf, and we do get some indications of his thought process, barely, mainly in Lothlorien when they're trying to decide what to do after that point. In terms of his relationship with Gandalf, though, let's set the stage a little bit. What we know about this comes from a few small things. In the tale of Aragorn and Arwen, and in the appendices, The Tale of Years, we get some hints about, Aragorn meeting Gandalf at a fairly young age. He, becomes great friends with him. He ends up doing a lot of stuff for Gandalf, like he goes off and, tries to find Gollum for him. And there's other things too, like I think it's actually at Gandalf's insistence that the Rangers provide some protection for the Shire. So Aragorn meets him at a fairly young and therefore fairly impressionable age. Now, I don't remember if it says exactly when he meets him, but I don't think it's very long after he hits 20 and Elrond reveals to Aragorn that, oh, by the way, your real name is not Estel, it's actually Aragorn, and you're the heir to the kingdoms of Gondor and Arnor. So, he finds out who he is, and very soon after that meets Gandalf. And so you could see why Gandalf would have a huge impact on his life as a whole. We also know that, like I said, he does a lot of things for Gandalf and at Gandalf's direction. But it's not just that. We also know that whenever it comes down to making decisions and getting advice, Aragorn really, really values Gandalf's advice. Near the end of the story, when all the really big decisions are done, because Sauron is defeated and all the other good stuff, Aragorn and Gandalf go up into Mount Mindalluin, the one that's just behind Minas Tirith, that Minas Tirith is kind of built into, and that's where they find the sapling of the White Tree. And they have a conversation in which Aragorn basically says, I wish you weren't leaving Middle-earth because I'd like to have you around to advise me. Because Aragorn is becoming king, and even though he's 87 years old, or 88 years old, I guess by now, even though all of that is true, actually he might even be 89 years old by that point. I forget. I'd have to go back and look exactly. But even though he's, plenty old, and he's done a lot and all this stuff, he's about to become king, and it's not a role he's ever actually had to do or really been raised for, because there was no kingdom that he could inherit, and so he had no father who was a king who could kind of ease him into that role. Gandalf, of course, is leaving Middle-earth because his time is up, and Aragorn is wishing that that wasn't the case. But, it gives us a hint of how Gandalf and Aragorn relate to each other. Aragorn really sees Gandalf as kind of a mentor and a person who gives really good advice. Now, the other angle that plays into this is the fact that Aragorn, after Gandalf's fall, is really in a tight spot, because on the one hand, he feels like he's inherited Gandalf's responsibility, which is to the quest, and therefore to Frodo, but also feels called, as is said in the chapters about Lothlorien when they're debating where to go, that he sees the dream that Faramir and Boromir had as a summons, and that summons is to go to Minas Tirith and help, defend it from Sauron. Because in the dream, the words are, seek for the sword that was broken and in Imladris it dwells. Why would they be told to seek for the sword that was broken if it wasn't to go get Aragorn and bring him back with the sword to Minas Tirith? Doesn't make any sense, right? So he has this conflicting thing going on, because Boromir's going to Minas Tirith, and Frodo ultimately has to go to Mordor, and then we get this very brief scene on the last night of in Lothlorien where they have to decide, what are we going to do next? The debate is, do we go to Minas Tirith first, or do we just go straight east? And it says Boromir, of course, is going to Minas Tirith. That's his duty. It's his home. The rest of them, it says, most of them would prefer to go to Minas Tirith first, but would follow a leader into the east, if there was one, who would, lead them there. But Frodo is kind of quiet because he hasn't worked up the courage yet. We know that he's going to kind of get there when Boromir makes his move at Parthgalen, and he's going to eventually decide, that pretty much decides it. I've got to go east and leave everybody else behind because the ring is going to corrupt everybody. But Aragorn is also quiet because, again, he's torn in his mind which way he should go because of his conflicting duties. This is highlighted by the fact that Celeborn has just asked them, which way are you going to go? And, Aragorn is really not sure, but what they end up doing, because Celeborn's a nice guy and a smart guy, is he gives them boats so they can just sail down the river without having to choose which side of it to go on until the last minute. So all of that is playing in Aragorn's mind. We have to make this decision at some point, and he never makes the decision even all the way up to Parthgalen, and then they get there, and even then he's like, well, Frodo, you're the ring bearer. You're the guy with the quest. You have to make the decision. And Aragorn's not going to make it for him. And Frodo asks for an hour to think. So you could see there, Aragorn is really reluctant to make a decision on this. And it's partially on this whole angle of, I feel like I have duties both ways, and I can't decide between the two. He's only going to really get some clarity when it finally comes down to following Merry and Pippin versus following Frodo and Sam, and that's only because after Boromir's death and their attempt to bury him, Legolas discovers one of the boats missing. Aragorn goes and checks it out and sees that Frodo's pack, and, well, he's not sure about Frodo's, but he's pretty sure about Sam's pack being missing because it was really heavy and loaded, because that's the thing that Sam does. And he therefore surmises that Frodo and Sam went to the eastern shore alone, And so Frodo kind of has made the decision for him. And he's like, well, they've kind of gone their way, and now we have a duty to save Merry and Pippin. But even there, he's kind of like, there's not much chance this actually succeeds, but we're going to do it anyway. So they chase off after Merry and Pippin, and they find hints that Merry and Pippin are alive. Like Pippin manages to get his brooch off and onto the ground, and Aragorn finds that, and therefore they have this indication that they're alive, but they're still way behind. And then they meet up with Éomer, and he's like, we didn't see anybody but orcs, and everybody's dead. And, Gimli and Legolas and Aragorn keep having these conversations, and then one of them is like, well, do we even think there's any point here? They're probably dead. And he's like, yeah, well, we still got to go check. So, and then they finally meet back up with the resurrected Gandalf the White in Fangorn, and it's after that we could really see Aragorn stepping into the really confident role that we know him for. Now, he's been confident before, and here I have to bring up Coriolson again, because there's a scene earlier when he's trying to get the hobbits from Brede Rivendell that he pointed out as being one where Aragorn does not seem so sure of himself. I think it's when they're approaching Weathertop, and Merry or one of the hobbits asks him, okay, so what's our plan? And then Aragorn kind of thinks for a while and then slowly says, I think we should do this. And he kind of sees that as an indication that Aragorn is also not very sure of himself in this scene and has kind of some self-doubt type things going on. I'm not sure I totally buy that, because there are other things going on at that point, namely the fact that he's run around with 4 hobbits who haven't really been tested as far as he knows, so he kind of doubts their strength of will and a lot of other things. I mean, he even voices some of his doubts on that before that point. And he's dealing with trying to avoid a bunch of Black Riders, Nazgul, and we already know what he thinks of them, because in Bree, he actually, he mentions that they're really, really terrible, and they can visibly see that he's like experiencing pain or something, because he's like clutching at the arm of his chair and his face is drawn like it's in pain. So he's trying to avoid the Nazgul, and he's trying to figure out what these hobbits are capable of, and he's like, well, I don't know. So I don't know how much stock I put specifically in that scene, but certainly in this period between when Gandalf falls and when Gandalf returns, we can see Aragorn acting in a lot of either self-doubt, or not necessarily self-doubt all the time, but also the idea that, I'm going to do what I need to do, but whether that has any positive outcome, who knows. Merry and Pippin could still end up in Isengard despite our best efforts. They could end up dead despite our best efforts, all that. So for all of that period, Aragorn is really just kind of torn up. And I think a lot of that relates to how he sees Gandalf. Like I said, he's known him all his life almost, all his adult life, since he was really young, and has been taking orders, not orders exactly, but direction and advice from Gandalf for years. And of course, Gandalf is supremely wise, being an incarnate Maya and, all this stuff. So Aragorn, probably meeting him at the relatively impressionable age that he did, has come to think of Gandalf as like the guy that you can go to for anything and get the best advice. But this kind of goes back to what I said earlier. The whole decision of, do we go over Caradhras or under the mountains through Moria? Again, he's looking at this going, if after Gandalf died, you can see him, this is not stated, but you could imagine him thinking in his mind, my idea was awful because it almost got us all killed. The idea that succeeded still got Gandalf killed, and he was the one with the good idea. It's like, now what? I'm making terrible decisions. And this is a thing he says multiple times. It's like, all my decisions have gone astray. In this period, he says that, I think, 2 or 3 times. And he's like, all my choices are ill. I keep messing up. I'm totally screwing everything up. So you could see why in this period, what he might be thinking is, Gandalf was the smartest guy, and I was following his advice when we did anything right, and now I'm doing everything wrong. His confidence in himself is destroyed because of Gandalf being out of the picture. And I think that points to this idea that he has this not over reliance exactly, because it's wise to rely on Gandalf's advice in most cases, but it's like he hasn't built up his own, decision making prowess yet, and is kind of leaning too heavily on a crutch, if you will. So that's what kind of occurred to me when I was listening to this, is like all these little elements that if you, take hints from here and here and here and here, you can kind of see psychologically where Aragorn would be in this moment. It's not exactly like a PTSD situation, but it's kind of close. It's like something has happened that has absolutely broken his confidence in the mission, his own, ability to lead, everything else. It's like he takes on the mantle because he feels like he has to, but he doesn't really feel up to the task. And he is in a situation where his decisions, which he thinks are all going wrong, could end up, deciding the fate of the quest and everything else. So it's like, can you imagine being in his shoes? Like, that's absolutely terrible to think about, let alone be in that situation. So, like I said, I think a lot of it is the fact that he's kind of used Gandalf in a sense as a crutch for his own decision making, because he's taking so much advice from him and all this other stuff that when Gandalf is out of the picture, and that after Aragorn almost got them all killed on Caradhras, it's like, ugh. You could just imagine how much self-doubt he must be experiencing, and he's probably even beating himself up over it. Because it's almost like, maybe if we'd gone through Moria first and not done my stupid idea first, who knows what's going through Aragorn's mind, but it can't be healthy. And so again, not exactly codependence on Gandalf, because that's a little bit too strong of a word, but I think he really is thinking of Gandalf in a way that's kind of like a crutch. Like, he's the guy that, makes better decisions. Now, you might argue, well, then why did he disagree with him on Moria? Well, I think with Moria, Aragorn had such a strong reaction to the first time he went into Moria that he was just like, I really don't want to go back there. So, Aragorn, I think, was really just trying to avoid that. Also, Aragorn does have a premonition about Gandalf, because he says, okay, we tried my way, it didn't work. I will go your way if this last warning doesn't change your mind. If you enter Moria, beware. He doesn't exactly say what he means, but we do know that Aragorn has premonitions, because he tells Éomer at one point, we'll meet again though all the hosts of Mordor stand between, and they do exactly that on the Pelennor fields. So Aragorn has this sense that it's bad news for Gandalf if they go in there, at least at that point. It's not clear that he has that sense before they make their first decision to go over Caradhras. But he definitely doesn't like the idea of going into Moria at all. So it's not surprising that he would have a strong opinion on that, even if he thinks Gandalf in general has better advice. So it's not like he thinks that Gandalf is necessarily always perfect, or anything like that, but he definitely has a sense of Gandalf makes really good decisions. He's a smart guy, he knows his stuff, and therefore you can usually rely on him for advice. And then in the wake of everything, turns out Gandalf's advice was right, because Caradhras was impossible, and Moria, Moria they probably could have made it through, except for the fact that Pippin was dumb. But, that's another story. You have to wonder what Aragorn was thinking about Pippin, actually. But that's way another story. But, it turns out Gandalf was in fact right, but he still got killed as a result. That's what's going through Aragorn's mind. And so he's like, man, the smartest guy in our group is dead, and now I have to decide between two things that I think are obligations on my part, and so how do I do that? So you can see why Aragorn in this period is supremely lacking in confidence, because the one person that he thought was like the main weapon they had in their attempt to finish the quest and defeat Sauron, because let's face it, Gandalf is kind of the main player at almost all stages of this, and he's gone. And not only is he gone, but it was, it's like our best option resulted in that, and I was the one that had the worst option. So yeah, you could just see, like, yeah, I have been confirmed that I'm an idiot and Gandalf is smart, and now the idiot is left leading the group. So I just thought that was really interesting, because if you do pick up on the clues, none of this is stated, because like I said, it's almost all from the perspective of the hobbits, and we get very little in terms of the inner workings of Aragorn or anybody else. But if you pick up on those clues, you can kind of see Tolkien painting a subtle picture of, this is a guy who's experiencing a really, really severe mental and spiritual shock, and who is really missing somebody that he had come to rely on very heavily. And that's why, even at the end, he's telling Gandalf, can't you, like, stay in Middle Earth a little while? So I just thought that was really interesting. There are perhaps other theories you could come up with to, put all these dots together that don't involve quite what I'm saying. And if you have alternate theories, please do put them in the comments. Please also like and share the video around if you found it interesting. Subscribe if you want to make sure to catch more of my content in the future. And if you're on YouTube, make sure you click the bell icon so you don't miss any notifications. You can follow me on the platform formerly known as Twitter for Tolkien-related trivia questions, and there are, of course, other support and social links in the description below. Until the next time, I'm the Tolkien Geek, signing out for the Tolkien Lore channel. Namarie. Thanks to all my channel supporters, especially Nathan Dufour, Paul Leone, Robert Kindling, and Stephen Clayton.